Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening for another very special edition of WOWSA Live. We're here with Taylor KC for Cunningham. So Taylor KCSEA is her Instagram handle, and she's from Honolulu. She's a marine biologist and shark conservationist. Originally from Florida. She was a swimmer or is a swimmer, but now she spends a lot of her time on science, research, education, and underwater. Welcome.
Thanks for having me. It's really great to be able to talk a little bit more about sharks with the swimming community a little bit.
Yes. And I understand your research was on hammerhead. What was it? Hammerhead
Hydrodynamics. Very fancy.
hydrodynamics. So
Yeah.
obviously, ocean swimmers know all about hammerheads. And how is the hydrodynamics of a hammerhead? I mean, that's a
So it's obviously very different from your normal shark. They've got this big wing, or what we call a cephalofoil, attached to the front of their face. So it's essentially almost like an airplane in a way, but on the front of their face. And so the research that we were looking at was sort of analyzing if there's any difference in drag for the hammerheads compared to a normal shark species that has that minus the cephalofoil essentially. And then we also went in and sort of compared multiple species of hammerheads, because there's a variety of different species that all have slightly different shapes to the head. So we were looking at comparing the drag between those species. And then for each of those, we also looked at potentially if there's any change with movement. So as they tilt the head up and down or side to side, or when they're rolling, does that alter the drag that they're experiencing? And so ultimately we were kind of looking at, is there a potential optimal angle that they want to swim at to reduce that drag, or potentially that could be an angle of attack for them because it's reducing that drag. So trying to kind of understand essentially how having that big wing is going to affect their swimming.
Wow. Wow. Now, you're a shark conservationist, and hammerheads is where you started. Have you studied all different kinds of sharks, and what are the differences of shark? We're ocean swimmers. So,
Yeah.
we're out there swimming the ocean on the surface, and we're looking down below. I mean,
Mhm.
you, on the other hand, are a diver, so you're underneath the water. And how is it down there? What do you feel like? Nervous, excited?
So for me, I've grown to love the sharks. Sorry, my dog might make an appearance here or there. I've grown to love the sharks quite a lot. And so for me, I don't necessarily feel the same fear that maybe I did even as a kid.
Mhm.
Swimming in the water, I was definitely one of those kids living in Florida where I was like, don't let me go in the ocean alone. Like, I need someone with me, kind of thing. Um, and at this point now, I obviously have a lot more training in water with sharks that's helped me kind of become more confident in the water with them. Obviously, they're still very capable apex predators, and so you never want to underestimate their abilities. But at the same time, I've spent a lot of time sort of reading their behavior, getting to know them. So for me, it's mostly just excitement. And quite honestly, a lot of peace and calm working with sharks. They're a lot less spooky or intimidating than what most people, I guess, give them credit for.
Yeah.
Um, I primarily actually, I am scuba certified. I'm also a dive master, but my passions kind of actually lie in free diving. So we do actually spend a lot of our time at the surface and then diving to depth as long as we can hold our breath, essentially.
Okay.
And so you get a little bit of both perspectives, both above at that same level that would be similar to swimmers, and then slightly underneath as well. So it's pretty cool to see them in different environments. And obviously, depending on where you are in the world, you're dealing with very different species. Um, I have actually limited experience with hammerheads in water. I have swam with scalloped hammerheads, but in terms of the other 6 or 7 species that I've researched, I actually haven't been in water with them. And then been in water with things like tiger sharks, oceanic blacktips,
Wow.
Galapagos, sandbar, oceanic whitetips, lots of different species. So
Got it.
um, cool to see not only a difference between species, but also between environments, because diving in Florida is very different than diving here in Hawaii, as it is everywhere else in the world.
Yeah. And you're headquartered out of Honolulu, correct? On Oahu?
So we are in Haleiwa, which is
Okay.
on the same island as Honolulu. We're still all on Oahu, but we're on the opposite side of the island.
Got it. So you're in the North Shore.
Yes.
Yes. And I mean, what do you do on any given day when you're working? What's your do you wake up, you go outside your apartment, you go on a boat, you put on scuba gear?
Yeah, so it's always early mornings. We get up pretty much before the sun rises to make sure we have everything ready to go. So with the organization I work with, One Ocean Diving, not only do we work in research and conservation, but we also sort of work in this education ecotourism sort of field. And so one of the joys of my job is being able to take out everyday people to see the sharks in their natural environment. And so I'm sort of leading those dives and teaching them about sharks and showing them in their natural environment. And so we get up really early, make sure the boat's ready, everything like that. And then we head out of the harbor out here in Haleiwa. We can have up to 5 charters a day, each being
Oh,
about 2 hours. So we see a lot of different people as the day goes on, depending on weather and how full we are for that day. But each time we go out, we're essentially educating everyone about the sharks on the way out. We get everybody in the water, sort of facilitate that experience for them so that they can not only be safe, but have a better understanding of what sharks are
wow.
like in their natural habitat, because I guarantee it's not like Jaws. And then on the way back in, we like to really kind of bring home not only answering everyone's questions, but also just sort of really showing people the importance of sharks to our oceans. And then on top of that, why we want to protect them. Because there are a lot of threats facing sharks that we want to make sure that we educate people about so they can speak up against and sign petitions or get involved in ways to help the animals.
Got it. So let's say I showed up at your dock with 10 swimmers. They're from the middle of the country. They haven't seen the ocean before, and they have this image of Jaws.
Yeah,
As we go out, what are some of the basics that you would tell these people before they got in the ocean to make them less worried?
for sure. So a lot of what we go over are sort of like safety rules that we have for in the water. And these are not to like get rid of the fun of the experience or even to make people worried. They're purely not only good rules for when you're out with us, but they're also really great takeaways. And so we'll cover things like wanting to make eye contact with the sharks to show them that you're a predator, trying not to splash excessively, keeping noise to a minimum if you can, keeping like your arms somewhat close to your body instead of being like, hey, sharks, that kind of thing. So going over little tips and tricks like that. So that way, not only are they going to be really safe in the water with us, but we always like to tell people, you never know, if you're in the ocean, you could run into a shark, right? It's their home. We're taking the responsibility to go into their environment. And so these rules that we kind of talk about are not only great for when you're with us, but if you're out on your own in the ocean and accidentally bump into a shark, instead of doing the classic, let me swim away as fast as I can, make all the noise, all the bubbles possible, you have a little bit better of an understanding of what I should do to not only stay safe for myself in the water, but also to make sure that animal understands that I'm not something it wants to chase after. And so we go over that. And then we also just talk about why sharks are such great predators, all their senses that make them such amazing animals and really smart animals, so that people can kind of get an understanding of the fact that they're not just mindless man-eating machines. They're not swimming around eating everything they see. If that was the case, I'd be missing some fingers and toes right now. And so we talk a little bit about that. And then we also go over some behavior stuff. So it's kind of an intro into the behavior. Obviously, the more time you spend in the water, the easier it is to pick those things up. But we kind of go over this conversation that the sharks have with each other and with other animals to reduce the fact that they don't want to have confrontations with other organisms in the water. So we go over all that information by the time you get out in the water. So that way, if nothing else, you have a little bit of peace of mind that you've got some background knowledge about the sharks before you hop in. But it also just kind of, I think it helps to explain maybe some of those myths that people have or those misconceptions people have about sharks. So that way, hopefully, by the time they get in the water, they at least know a little bit better what to expect.
Got it. Wow, that's really interesting. I really like where you said keeping eye contact with a shark. So
Yeah.
for all those ocean swimmers out there, keep an eye contact. And why is that important? And I mean, if you're feeling nervous, isn't that a really difficult thing to do, at least the first time?
For sure. And I think it's something that obviously with comfort, you get easier at doing. Um, the biggest thing, it's eye contact is obviously really important, especially if that animal is maybe showing you some interest. But just being aware of your surroundings in general is a good kind of rule of thumb, no matter what you're doing in the ocean, whether you're surfing, swimming, diving, whatever it is, to be aware of your surroundings is always really important. And the reason we always talk about that with people on the way out to the dive is because sharks are predators. We're also predators. Granted, we're maybe not as suited for life in the ocean as they are, but predators respond to other predators.
Oh,
Same way predators respond to other prey. And you don't hear about a lot of fish that are actively looking around, making eye contact with other animals that are predators or that are prey, right? And so the whole awareness thing and that eye contact, the idea is to make yourself look more like a predator. The
oh,
only animals in the ocean that actively track other animals or that actively acknowledge other animals are predators. So
oh,
by showing the sharks that you see them or that you're aware of your surroundings makes you look a lot more like a predator and a lot less like some injured animal that's just floating at the surface nonchalantly.
wow. Wow. Well, and so they actually know that we are actually looking at them through our goggles.
Yeah, they're really, really smart animals. If nothing else, so we always recommend, for example, for the masks that we use, some of them have mirrored lenses to help like protect from the sun, others don't. Swimming goggles are similar in that way. And so I always recommend if you can have clear goggles, that's obviously better. Protect your eyes. If it's super awful sunny, like it's okay to wear mirrored goggles. They can acknowledge the fact that you're just turning your head and turning your body. Obviously, the larger that particular shark may be, the more you may have to do to sort of elicit that response in a way. So if I'm dealing with a smaller shark, it might be enough for me to just turn and look at them like this for them to say, oh, they're acknowledging me. Whereas with a larger shark, turning your whole physical body
Oh,
is more effective. So I always tell people, I'm like, if you're in the water, and obviously as a swimmer, you're going in one direction. So you don't want to be just spinning around all the time. But let's say you're swimming, you see a shark come into the area, it doesn't hurt to pause for a second and face that animal and
wow.
continue to follow it just to show them, like, hey, I'm aware of you in the water. I'm not just ignoring you. I know what's going on. I'm cognitive. I'm smart. I'm also a predator as well.
Wow. And then the other thing that struck me is when you said keep your arms near you or on your body. Can you explain why that's important?
So it obviously depends on situation, right? As a swimmer, you're going to be trying to get that extension for each stroke. Um, the idea more so is, so for us, we go out to a site, it's a schooling site. These particular species have kind of a small home range. They don't really leave that general area. That's kind of like their living room in a sense. And we could be dealing with anywhere between one shark to almost 100 sharks on any given dive. And so for us, the whole arms closer to your body thing is simply because the species that we deal with do like to feed on things like crabs, squid, octopus, stuff that looks more similar, right, to your fingers. And it's not so much to say, like, if I stick my arm out for 1 second, I'm shark bait. That's not at all what it is. It's more so, again, looking like that streamlined animal.
Okay.
Not very many predators swim around like this,
Yeah.
right? And so the whole keeping your arms a little bit closer, the idea is that instead of having this appendage floating way out here, potentially that you're not paying attention to, maybe looking like it doesn't belong to you
Okay.
versus something slightly closer, just looks like it's more part of your entity.
Got it.
in a sense. So it's less eye-catching to have those sort of like long appendages and things kind of closer to you, because it's not going to catch their eye. They are naturally very curious animals. I can say with certainty that almost every single one of my dives, the sharks, if curious, are not coming up like, ah, like that's not how they investigate things. Um, but they do potentially, they are curious animals. They may want to potentially come and investigate those sorts of things. And so it's mostly preventative stuff. It's just saying like, hey, I'm not saying if your hand is sitting out here, they're going to come and investigate it, but they're way less likely to if it's
Okay.
closer to you.
Got it. Got it. And then it was the comment about reflective goggles, actually, or masks, interests me. What about people who wear watches or necklaces or rings or bracelets? Is there
For
some?
sure.
Would you recommend not wearing those, or what's the when you
So
have shiny things?
yeah. So a big misconception about most shark species is that like little shiny things, like all the rings on my fingers, are going to be really attracting. And that can be true for some species. It depends very much on the environment you're in,
Okay.
depends very much on the species that you're dealing with. So, for example, the sharks that I dive with, sometimes I wear gloves, sometimes I don't, and all my rings are exposed. These particular species don't necessarily find that as eye-catching. These little rings are too small, if
Okay.
that makes sense. So you kind of have to think about it, is the object that I'm questioning similar in prey size to
Okay.
something that these animals would normally eat? And so for the species we deal with, they're anywhere between 4 to 12 feet in length, even larger if it's something like a tiger shark. And so these little rings, not something that's interesting to them, you know, like they're not going after stuff that's the size of a penny.
Yeah.
Um, However, if let's say I was in French Polynesia diving with little blacktip reef sharks, they can find little shiny things very eye-catching because they do eat smaller objects.
Got it.
The better rule of thumb is less so the shiny stuff and more the bright colors, the bright neons, yellows, whites, because
Okay.
that's going to stand out in really high contrast to the surrounding blue, green, dark ocean.
Oh
And
wow.
so sharks have actually a lot better eyesight than what most people give them credit for. The reason they kind of get this reputation for having bad eyesight is because they are what we call a monochromat. It's kind of like being colorblind. Essentially, it means they see in one singular color plane. So because of that, they're able to pick up the shapes, the shadows, the high contrast objects, and the bright colors standing out against that blue background. And
Okay.
so for them, something that's white looks even brighter in comparison to the darker surroundings
Okay.
than it would for something like a color vision animal. If you think about it, I had a coworker point this out the other day. Why are we as humans so attracted to neon colors? Because it's exciting. It elicits a response from us as predators, right?
Yeah.
Same thing for other predators,
Okay.
whether it be sharks, lions, zebras, whatever it is.
Uh-huh.
And so I always tell people, if you can be more silhouetted in a sense,
Okay.
like darker colors, blues, blacks, at least in particular, if you think sharks may be around,
Got it.
that's always a better option. Simply because they do find those things more eye-catching. So for example, on the way out, if I notice guests have white watches on or are planning to use bright yellow fins, I
Got
may
it.
say, hey, cover that up, or let me give you a darker pair of fins. So that way you can be a little bit more streamlined. And most of it is going to be, it's more eye-catching on things like appendages. Your arms move around a lot, your feet move around a lot. So it's a little bit more eye-catching if those colors are on those more moving objects.
Okay.
I don't really have an issue, let's say if someone wears a bright yellow bikini or bright yellow swim trunks, I'm not as worried about that sort of thing. It's mostly going to be on things like your hands, your feet, stuff that's kind of flailing around while you're in the water. Um, and again, it's not to say if you wear those colors, you're going to get all that attention from the sharks, but by kind of minimizing those bright accents, you could potentially minimize the interest the animals might show you.
Got it. Got it. The other thing that really struck me, you said the sharks that you regularly encounter are 4 to 12 feet and sometimes bigger. Now,
Yes.
for our non-American metric-oriented people, you're talking about 1.5 to 4
Yeah, so
meters.
anywhere between like 2 to our biggest shark being closer to like 4.5, 5 meters.
Wow.
Yeah, so definitely large animals.
Yes, yes. And then the other thing that struck me is you've mentioned how smart they are. Like how does one measure intelligence in a apex predator like a shark?
So sharks are obviously very different from things like humans or even things like dolphins, whales, right? Mammals are known to have this very cognitive awareness. They feel emotions, they think thoughts, they connect with other individuals. And so sharks are a little bit different in that sense.
Okay.
They maybe aren't as cognitive as mammals would be. That being said, it doesn't mean that they're not intelligent.
Okay.
Sharks have been evolving on this earth for over 400 million years. When we look at evolution, they actually were on this planet before trees, which is kind of insane to think about. And so, over evolution, they've adapted to perfectly fit their environment. And so, for sharks, I like to compare it, it's more of an instinctual intelligence. It's not to say that they aren't aware of you in the water, but they don't necessarily have the same like social bonds the way things like dolphins, whales do. Mammals in particular, for example, we give a lot of child care, right? We care about our offspring for a long period of time. Sharks don't do that. It's in a sense every man for himself in the shark world, whether you're an itty bitty baby shark or a big giant grandma shark, you know? But they're still extremely intelligent animals as predators. And so typically predators have higher levels of intelligence than prey just because they've evolved to do so. Doesn't mean that prey items can't also be intelligent, but it's a different type of intelligence. And so I always tell people, I'm like, sharks have this very instinctual intelligence. Their whole goal is to survive.
Got
And
it.
so with that, they've obviously adapted to be these very capable predators. But at the same time, because they've adapted to survive, it doesn't always make sense to go around attacking everything that you see, right?
Yeah.
They don't know if I can hurt them or if some other animal can hurt them in the water. So they're not going to go around and just bite me because I could easily bite them back, right? They don't know if I'm capable, if I'm also a capable predator. And so because they're so intelligent, it comes from all those senses we talked about, right? Their eyesight, their smell, the fact that they can feel water pressure and movement around them, the fact that they can pick up electrical impulses like heartbeats and things like that in the water. They've evolved to have all these amazing adaptations and amazing senses so that way they can take as much time as possible to assess if that animal is something that they do actually want to approach and investigate versus not.
Yeah.
And so even though they maybe don't like have the same beautiful social bonds and childhood care that something like mammals would, they're still extremely intelligent animals. And so I think that's a huge misconception that people have, is that they are just kind of swimming around biting whatever they can find, and that's just not the reality of it.
Yeah. And one thing that you did mention to me is that, because they have this instinct to stay alive, they're not attacking, let's say, a powerful thing. They're attacking a weaker thing, an older thing,
Yeah,
whether that be a fish or some other kind of mammal. Correct?
for sure. So sharks are in a way almost like the white blood cells we have in our body. They prefer to eat the stuff that's sick, injured, dying, already rotting and decaying on the bottom of the ocean. And it kind of comes down to how much energy they're going to use to capture that animal. So if you think about it, it's almost like if I have to run a marathon to get my dinner versus if I'm getting delivery food, I'd much rather have delivery food. You know what I mean? So it's kind of the same idea. That shark doesn't want to waste all their energy chasing after this fast, healthy animal that it may not even catch. It much rather eat the stuff that's already limping, already struggling to swim, or already dead and on the bottom, because it's going to take a lot less energy out of them, and they're going to get just as much energy from that meal in return. So they help kind of keep the ecosystems really healthy because they're taking out those sort of weaker individuals from the population and leaving behind kind of a healthy ecosystem that can now thrive and grow and do really well. So it kind of all comes back to that idea that we were talking about, like being aware of your surroundings, keeping your hands closer to you, trying not to splash and make all that excess noise. All of those things help you look less like that sick, injured animal and look more like that predator. So all the rules that we talk about, or all those things that we recommend to people, really just all come back to the biology of the animals themselves.
Yeah, amazing. And then you mentioned the ecosystem and the shark's role in that, and just explain to all of us ocean swimmers why sharks are so valuable and so essential to the health of our oceans and therefore the world.
Yeah, so this whole idea of like white blood cells of the ocean, if you think about it as humans, when we get sick, that's what keeps us healthy. That's what fights back and helps our bodies stay healthy the way that we want them. And sharks are essentially that role in our oceans. Because they're taking out those sort of sick animals, they're leaving behind populations that are now really healthy and can grow and do well. And it's really cool. A lot of scientists have done studies on this and found that the more sharks you have in a particular location or a particular area, the more fish that you actually have present as well, because they're helping to keep that system in sort of a balance. Sharks are what we call a keystone predator, which essentially is a species, the health of their the health of their population indicates the health of the overall ecosystem.
Oh, wow.
So it essentially means if sharks aren't doing well, the ocean is probably also not doing well. There's a really cool video out there. I would definitely recommend you go and watch it. It's about the reintroduction of wolves to Yellowstone National Park. It's called How the Wolves Changed the River. But it explains this concept really, really, really well. Years ago, the wolves were hunted out of Yellowstone, and the entire ecosystem not necessarily deteriorated, but it wasn't nearly as healthy as when they were present. So the National Park Foundation reintroduced the wolves, and it actually caused such a cascade effect throughout that ecosystem that it went all the way down to the plant life, which then helped reduce erosion, which then physically changed where the rivers were located in the park.
Wow.
And so it's a really cool video. I would definitely recommend How the Wolves Changed the River. It's a great explanation of this idea of keystone predators. And sharks are essentially the wolves for our oceans.
Got it.
And so we want them around because if we don't have that predator sort of maintaining that system from the top down, we get this sort of cascade effect of imbalance within the ecosystem.
Got it. Wow. This is actually so fascinating. So, explain to us where you work. If people want to know more about your work and the work of your colleagues, where do they go?
Yeah.
What do they Google?
So if you want to ever join us on a dive, or if you just want to have a ton of information, not only about sharks, but ways that you can help sharks, we're always sharing different petitions, campaigns, things that you can get involved with, even from the middle of the country where you don't have access to the ocean. You can check out oneoceandiving.com. We're also all over social media at One Ocean Diving, as well as a ton of other exciting like sort of branches off of that Instagram. So that's a great resource. And then if you're interested in sort of my personal stuff that I do have a website and blog where I love to share more information, not only about sharks, but about free diving and conservation and marine biology. So that's taylorkcdiving.com, and I'll make sure I give you all that information if you want to link it out or anything like that. And then like you mentioned earlier, my Instagram is also at taylork.sea, like the sea. I also have a YouTube. I don't post on there very often, but if you want like video format stuff, both of my adventures outside of sharks, but also information about swimming with sharks and my experiences with them, that's another great resource.
Well, thank you very much. You've been very helpful, very educational, and keep up your great work in Haleiwa.
Hopefully we'll see some of you guys out with us.
Yes. Thank you.
Cool, thank you.